Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Return of the Content Patch for the 3rd of June 2016. My name is Total Biscuit, bringing you back today's gaming news and industry comment. At the end of the show, of course, we'll be bringing you the OC Remix track of the day. Coming up in the show, AMD announces a $199 VR-ready graphics card, and Ubisoft launches a $15 Rainbow Six Siege Starter Edition. All this coming your way right about now. Speculation as to the new line of AMD graphics cards, codenamed Polaris, has been floating around for quite some time. However, AMD has now announced the RX 480 is somewhat of a change to their usual naming designation, which is going to be launching at the end of June for $199. They describe this card as being VR ready, and spec-wise, it seems fairly similar to the current Radeon R9 390, which has a recommended retail price of around $330, so a fairly significant price difference between the two. The 390 came out in June of last year, and this 480 would appear to be the first in the Polaris generation line, although certainly not the high-end Polaris card that people have been expecting. While the specifications are similar to the 390 as mentioned, the biggest difference outside of the much lower recommended retail price is the far lower power consumption, reported to be around 150 watts versus the 390 at 275 watts. Now, as to what exactly they mean by VR ready, it's something of a marketing phrase more so than anything else. They did claim that one of the Polaris cards would be both Vive and Oculus certified, whatever that might be. However, they've gone really into no further details. Most modern graphics cards can support VR. It's not like you need a special graphics card to run it. A Vive can be connected via a traditional HDMI or DisplayPort cable, whereas the Oculus can be connected via an HDMI cable, and most modern graphics cards would support both of those anyway. But regardless, the card would appear to be powerful enough, certainly, to run pretty much every VR application that is currently available, bearing in mind, of course, that at the moment, most VR games are actually surprisingly not that demanding, using fairly basic graphics techniques and texture work to compensate for the high frame rate and resolution required for those applications. One way or the other, this is a very aggressively priced card that claims performance that is quite similar to the more expensive R9 390 of last year. Bear in mind, the R9 390 equivalent is a GTX 970, give or take. Obviously, it's going to vary on a game-by-game basis, but performance-wise, you're seeing the 390 deliver fairly similar performance across the board. However, despite the fact that the 1070 has just been released and the 970 has been around for a little while now, it still is priced at just over $300. So it's a fairly significant price difference between those two. Not to mention that the power consumption of the 480 is significantly lower, which will hopefully result in more efficient and hopefully quieter cooling, as well as the potential of a higher overclock ceiling, although, of course, until we really get our hands on it, we have no idea how well it is going to clock. What interests me about this release and why I think it's absolutely fantastic is that the price point is so aggressive, considering the performance, that it may very well be a true price-performance winner, like a potential price-performance leader on the market. The 390 is more than enough to run any modern game really, really well at 1080p, and of course you can push it even further than that if you're not necessarily looking for 60 FPS or even higher frame rate gameplay. Getting access to something with that level of performance for only $199 is, I think, going to be a major boon for those on a tighter budget looking to upgrade, or those looking to get into PC gaming without a huge financial outlay. This is also, of course, going to help people upgrade to be able to use those VR headsets, which are, of course, a fairly large financial investment, considering these are headsets designed for early adopters and enthusiasts at the moment. Anything that will take the overall price of a VR setup down, kind of take the sting out of the tail, is certainly going to help stimulate that part of the market. Not to mention, anything that makes high-end PC gaming more accessible to people is, in my opinion, a very, very good thing. It's certainly become obvious lately that Nvidia has been running away with it in terms of the high-end stakes. You know, with the 1080 just being released, it's got the high-end market pretty much cornered. You know, there's nothing that AMD can currently offer that can compete with that. However, AMD, and I recall, of course, ATI back in the day, always used to be the kings of price performance. I used to buy ATI a lot simply because when it came to value for money, when it came to performance per pound, in my case, or performance per dollar, ATI and AMD seem to be the ones that nailed it consistently, and releasing a card like this at this price very much seems to continue that particular trend, and that's great for them. I think it's very important that we have a lot of competition in this marketplace. There have been accusations leveled primarily at Nvidia for anti-competitive practices, and there is certainly some validity to some of them over the past few years, although I feel some others have been somewhat overblown or misunderstood. Regardless, it would not be good if we only had one GPU provider. It's important that we have at least two companies vying for our attention, vying for our consumer dollar, and trying to outdo each other. I'm intrigued to see what the higher end of the Polaris family is going to offer, but in the meantime, the RX 480 looks like it may very well be the new price performance king and a worthy upgrade, especially if your GPU is a few years out of date. Needless to say, we can only really go off the specs and AMD's word at the moment. The slides that they showed at the Computex show certainly looked promising during their 2016 keynote. The question is whether or not it will live up to that. We've all heard the stories before, both in terms of AMD and Nvidia, of promises offered yet not delivered upon. I'm certainly intrigued to see how well it does, though, and I certainly hope that it does well. It would be nice to get a new arms race between these two companies. That only really benefits us as the consumer. There is nothing whatsoever wrong with that, and I would encourage people to be supportive of the company that provides you with the highest quality product for the price point that you're looking for, which around the lower and mid-end at this point may very well now be AMD. Ubisoft have released a starter edition for the formerly full-priced AAA release Rainbow Six Siege. As it stands, the starter edition will cost you $15 as opposed to the $50 that the full-priced release is asking for. The only difference between the starter edition and the regular edition is the process in which you unlock the various operators or classes within the game. The starter edition provides you with full access, according to the FAQ, to Rainbow Six Siege, and it will unlock 4 operators for you immediately. The additional grinding, and that is not a term that I just made up, that is a term they're using in their FAQ, for the remaining 16 original operators will still be available. However, it will cost significantly more in-game currency, known as Renown, to unlock each operator compared to the standard edition. Now, the way it works in standard is that as you unlock more operators, the price of the operators increases. It starts at 500 renown, then kind of goes up to 1,000. It caps out at 2,000. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to unlock each operator, especially at the start. You're getting operators maybe every couple of games, but then it takes longer and longer up to the 2,000 renown cap. But it doesn't take too long to unlock everybody. However, the starter edition will require 12,500 renown past the first 4 operators. That is, of course, a massive increase versus the price in the standard edition. Otherwise, the starter edition is absolutely identical. It includes the single-player and co-op terrorist hunt missions, as well as all of the multiplayer modes and all of the multiplayer maps. It is still possible to buy a renown booster in the game, which will increase the speed at which your renown is acquired. And it is worth noting that the first 2 operators that you get are randomly selected from a pool of what they call entry-level operators, which includes Rook, Sledge, Ash, Fuse, Mute, and Smoke. They have also included the average time it will take to unlock one operator using Renown in the starter edition, which is approximately 15 hours. That does sound about right, based on what I've played of it. You can earn a reasonable amount of Renown by playing the multiplayer. You can actually earn quite a lot of initial renown by playing the single-player missions and completing the optional objectives. That's actually a really good way to get a lot of in-game currency very quickly. However, there are, of course, a limited number of those objectives that you can get. The average time it usually takes to unlock an operator in the multiplayer mode once you've got to 2,000 renown in the standard edition is about 2 hours, but of course there are boosters also available there as well. One last thing worth noting is that the Starter Edition also has access to the daily and weekly renown challenges, which the full edition has as well, so there are extra ways of earning that renown. Now, why am I even talking about this? Why is this news? Well, I really do feel that this sort of thing could end up becoming a trend. This is not the first time that we've seen this multiplayer Starter Edition idea pop along, although this is a little bit of a different way to skin this particular cat. Recently, we saw the release of a so-called Starter Edition for Call of Duty Black Ops 3, which gave access to the multiplayer and didn't give you access to things like single-player and zombies and all sorts of things like that. Now, a lot of people, myself included, have been asking for the ability to buy such games piecemeal for a while. I like the idea of the multiplayer for Call of Duty every year, but I don't necessarily want to play zombies or the single-player campaign. It would be nice if I didn't have to spend the full $60 price tag. I think it's a very pro-consumer thing to do, not to mention it can stimulate the multiplayer community and player base if there happen to be problems in terms of the population. Now, Siege is not having problems in terms of its population right now, but of course, is it as big as something like CSGO? Well, no, nothing is. And I also imagine that Ubisoft feels somewhat threatened by the recent release of Overwatch, which is taking a lot of people's time away when it comes to their multiplayer shooter cravings. This time around, though, they're not cutting out any kind of single-player content. That said, Rainbow Six Siege does have single-player content. There's a preconception that it doesn't, don't know why, but it doesn't have a full-on campaign. It's got these terrorist hunt missions, which are still quite fun to do, by the way. I actually enjoy them a lot, but you're not getting the full Rainbow Six campaign experience that some people were hoping for. They didn't decide to cut those out, which is interesting to me. Massively limiting the speed at which you unlock the operators is an interesting approach. Is it a good one? Well, it can be. I think that there are very divided opinions when it comes to progression systems, but I think there is a proven need to have them, at least in the current multiplayer environment, for some reason. There's got to be something that people can earn. Even CSGO has a form of progression in things like crates. The acquisition of cosmetics is a form of progression outside of the ranking system, and Overwatch has a purely cosmetic progression system as well as levels, which, again, do nothing other than give you a crate full of cosmetics every time you achieve one. Blizzard felt the need to implement some kind of progression system, but they didn't want it to affect the progression of the game in any way, so they created a cosmetic progression system with optional crate purchases for real money, which, as I've stated before, and I'll continue to state this till the end of time, I feel it is entirely fine. It is cosmetic only, and even were it to affect, say, the rate at which you acquire crates without paying, it doesn't matter because it's cosmetic only. Once that starts to interfere with the game experience in a real tangible way, then you can start to complain. But what you've got here is a situation where the Starter Edition, or buying in at the lower end, does certainly affect the game in some way. If you have a lot of Starter Edition players on your team, you are less likely to have the full arsenal of operators available. It is, however, worth noting, especially in Rainbow Six Siege, that all of the operators are pretty damn effective one way or the other, and they all have access to a fairly similar weapons pool. The difference between the operators is not as crazy as something like, say, Overwatch, where there's a huge difference between the heroes. No. Everybody uses a gun one way or the other. Everybody has a gadget or two. Everybody has a particular theme, but they're all using relatively comparable firearms, and there's even what's called the Rookie, which is a sort of jack-of-all-trades basic class that doesn't have a special gadget, but has access to a wider variety of weapons. And if you can't access any of the operators because everybody's already chosen them, and you don't have any characters left in the pool that haven't already been picked, you can pick the Rookie, and the Rookie is still totally fine. He's not less powerful than the existing guys, it's just the existing operators have specific themes. For instance, Rook could drop a pack of armor, Tachanka can put down a light machine gun, there's a guy that can booby-trap doors, and all sorts of things like that. They're all pretty good in their own way. There are certainly ones that are favored over others, but at the end of the day, most of the time, once you've dropped your gadget and placed it in place, you're using a gun just like everybody else. So, does a lack of variety on your team when it comes to operators hinder your team? It could. I mean, there's a potential of that, although it is worth bearing in mind that you don't really have any idea what the opposing team is bringing to the table. It doesn't tell you. It's completely blind. So, you can choose your operator, but only on the basis of what everybody else on your team is picking and what you're trying to accomplish, not on the basis of what the enemy team is picking. There are no counter picks in Rainbow Six Siege, per se. As a result, although I don't think this is an ideal way of doing things, it's not a terrible way of doing things. And it's also worth noting that what this is doing is trading money for time, which is incredibly common, by the way, in the games industry, if you haven't noticed. It's a very similar idea to something like Overwatch. Let's bring that up again for the sake of it. When it comes to buying loot crates, you are trading money for time. People that don't have as much time to grind out the crates to get the skin that they want can just buy crates in order to skip that waiting time. Either you spend your time or you spend your money. It's kind of how life works. In this case, you have a fairly similar situation. Either you pay up front and you get things quicker, or you spend more of your time unlocking it. And that's pretty much the way almost any game with progression works. And is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, no. The point is it's giving a choice to the consumer. This is good, I think, for the overall player base. It's good when it comes to providing support and a constant influx of new blood into what is, in my opinion, one of the best multiplayer shooters we've had over the past few years. I don't know if I've stated this enough, but Rainbow Six Siege is a damn good game. Is it without issues? Well, no. It's got some pretty bad cheating issues at the moment, which I certainly hope get properly addressed by Ubisoft. It's hard to know exactly how they're going to address it. The more public you are when combating cheating, the easier it is for cheaters to figure out that they've been rumbled, as it were, and change their tactics and change their software and so on and so forth, which is not ideal, but obviously we are seeing cheating in Rainbow Six. It does happen. I haven't encountered too much of it, but there are definitely complaints, even at the higher end of ranked, that they are seeing cheaters. That could be a huge problem in a game like that, and it can absolutely ruin the experience. Plus, let's be honest, Uplay isn't ideal. They've had issues with VoIP connectivity and a couple of other things, but they've mostly ironed out the bugs and performance, and Rainbow Six Siege at the moment is a damn fine multiplayer shooter. It's a really unique experience. It's unlike anything else on the market. The closest I can maybe compare it to would be Insurgency, but even that isn't really all that similar. The unique attack-defense gameplay that's focused on gadgets and environmental destruction is a really cool experience. I love it. It's very tense. It's incredibly enjoyable to play. And I think that it's good that Ubisoft are providing some other way to get involved in Siege if you're not willing to pay full price. Now, I do not subscribe to the opinion that a multiplayer-only game, even though Siege was never multiplayer-only, but let's say a game that is predominantly multiplayer with a less complete single-player experience, is not worth full price. I've said this before, I've done a video on multiplayer-only games before. It absolutely can justify the price tag. The amount of time that a lot of people put into multiplayer games is hundreds upon hundreds of hours. So to then turn around and say, well, it wasn't worth my $50 after you put 300 hours into the game is, to me, kind of mind-boggling. That is some incredible price performance there. But it's almost as if some people, I think, have the attitude that if they're the ones having to create the content by playing the multiplayer game rather than having the content sort of served up to them in the form of a single-player campaign with cutscenes and voice acting, that the game's almost worth less, which it's a kind of mind-boggling idea to me. I don't really relate to that. If you're having enjoyable hours with the game, I don't see why it makes any difference as to whether or not it's single-player or multiplayer. You can also make the argument that it's being compared to games like CSGO, which are kind of frankly underpriced for what they are. Considering the amount of content that CSGO actually provides, they could have justified, I think, a higher price tag with it, but you know how Valve is. Valve's priority is getting people on Steam. That means that they can undersell, they can loss lead, they can create things like Dota 2 for free, despite the fact they could have very easily justified charging for a game like that. They have that very unique marketplace that no one else can really offer. The cosmetic culture surrounding those games is, frankly, insane, and not something that most other games can replicate. So maybe it's down to that. So, well, why should I get Siege instead of just getting CSGO for 15? Well, it's not the same experience, and just because CSGO is cheap, that doesn't mean that it dictates the price of the rest of the market. But you can absolutely understand why people would make the value proposition argument when comparing the two. Another thing to bear in mind, of course, that at $15, this now directly competes with CSGO as opposed to the full-priced edition, which is a little bit more of a leap. So there are definitely some benefits to that. I think this aggressive pricing policy is good for consumers, and I think it's a good choice. This Starter Edition apparently will not be around forever, though, by the way, so just do bear that in mind. It is supposedly fairly limited in terms of how long it's going to be available. It's not going to be available forever. So if you do wish to participate in it, then you will have to do so before June the 19th, and it's also not available on consoles. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. However, before I go, I'd like to give you the OC Remix track of the day, which you can download for free in the description below this video. We don't get a lot of Dark Souls remixes on ocremix.org. However, this time around, it's by the remixer Rotaka, and of course, the original composer for Dark Souls is Matai Sakuruba, who is incredibly well known. This is a synth and orchestral remix of Ornstein and Smoug's theme, and it goes by the name of Night and Executioner. You can download that for free in the description below this video. If you enjoyed the content patch, by all means feel free to click the like button. If not, the dislike button is right over there, and I'll see you next time.